I'm going to dive right in. How did university sports, do you think, set you up for the success you've had?
Well, I think there's sort of a positive and negative aspect to it. The positive one was back when I was playing at Queen's University, you could play football as long as you were in school. So I was playing football with people that had children, which was a great surprise for a high school football player. But it prepared me to go to the CFL and play with obviously people that are much older than you. So that was a positive thing. And then one of our captains, Mike Lambros, the year before had been drafted by the Eskimos. So it allowed me to at least have a point of contact. It's always fearful being a rookie walking into actually a team that had been to the Grey Cup the year before. So it was nice to have a friendly face. Negatively, interestingly enough, I was always a receiver. And I played my first 2 years at Queen's as a receiver, and then they moved me to running back for the last 2 years. And as you know, typically a Canadian running back doesn't get drafted in the CFL unless you're exceptional. That tends to be an American position. So I was drafted in the last round by Edmonton. And I remember having dinner and looking over, and Mr. Frank Morris, who was the Canadian scout, was having dinner at another table. So he invited me over and we sat down, we had dinner, and he looked at me and said, you know why we drafted you? And I said, Frank, honestly, I don't know why. And he said, it was because we scouted you in your first 2 years. So everyone sort of overlooked me. And fortunately, a team that went to the Grey Cup 7 times in my 8 years, it was great to go to them rather than say the Toronto Argonauts, who I don't think made a playoff game during my tenure.
That's awesome. Now, in your university days, were there things that you learned there, like those important, those lessons or experiences that carried forward that you still use?
Yes. As you know, I was head football coach at the University of Guelph for 6 years. And I used to tell the players that there's 2 classrooms at university. One is internal inside a building, and one is external on this football field. And I would argue that you learn more life lessons on the latter, the football field. So I think you learn lessons on how to win and lose properly, how to work as a team. You know, football is a unique sport. You have, tall, short people, fat people, thin people, fast people, slow people, and you have to work together. So much so that you even shower together. So it sort of forces you to get along. And so I learned the importance of working as a team. And as I got into my business career, I really tried to stress the importance of team, that we're all in this together. We have different gifts, we have different skills, but we have the one goal, and let's work together.
Now, because your sport was football, and especially once you got to the Eskimos, you would have seen people who came from all different university backgrounds, and many of them American. Why do you think a Canadian university was a great choice for you?
Well, one, I wanted to play hockey. Those were my 2 favorite sports, and I managed to play both varsity football and varsity hockey at Queen's University. And then I wanted to be close to my parents. My dad and mom wanted to watch me play sports, so I think that was important. And then I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. He was an engineer, and at that time, he thought Queen's had the best engineering school. So he said, you're going to Queen's. I wasn't really recruited outside of my dad telling me which university to go to. So I think all those were the reasons I wanted to go to Canadian University. I'm very proud to be a Canadian, and I think it was the right thing for me.
This next question, I know you saw the greatest influence on you. I'm always nervous of a word like greatest. It's like asking you which one is your kids is your favorite. But when you look back at your university sport days, are there people who had a great influence on you?
Well, I think most oldest sons select their dad, and I will too. Dad taught me a lot about humility. For a very successful man, he was quite humble, and I always respected him for that. But also with his humility came generosity. He was a very generous man. He told us kids that we were fortunate and not to abuse or be proud about it. In fact, the one line he kept repeating was, when you leave this world, make sure you leave it in a better place than when you found it. And he really drilled that into our heads. So I admired him for being such a generous person. He was, quite wealthy, but he lived an average lifestyle, didn't want to, promote himself. So that's one thing. The other person was Coach Campbell with the Edmonton football team. He was great at selecting people. He had a real good eye for selecting people. In fact, all of his positional coaches, except for one, ended up being head coaches in the CFL. So he was good at hiring people. He also had a good sense of humor, and I think that's important, especially in a high-stress sport. The other thing, along with his humor, he was quite funny. He brought what was called hat day. So typically on Friday or the day before a game, it's quite a light practice. You're just walking through things. But he called it hat day. So he allowed all us players to wear any type of hat we wanted. And as his tenure went farther, some of the hats got pretty extraordinary. So we had a lot of fun, even when we traveled. So you'd be playing BC, and on a Friday night, the press would be out to interview you, and all these guys would be running around with these crazy hats.
I'm so glad. You know what? Because I have a ask if we have time a Hugh Campbell story, and there you go. So I'm glad we got it.
I've got another one for you too, so we can wait to the end.
Okay, you've had quite a life. If you look back, and again, I don't want to say greatest, but what's an accomplishment that you feel is something that sits with you that you're proud of?
Well, I thought about that question, and not surprisingly, most of my greatest successes were involved with other people. It's not my success. And I think, making the Edmonton Football Club was amazing. As I said, drafted in the 7th round. I'd always wanted to be a professional athlete, but coming to a team that the year before had been to the Grey Cup, and I'm trying to beat out, if you can imagine this, a gentleman who the year before had won the Shenley Award as the best overall player, but he ends up tearing his hamstring during training camp, and I end up starting in my first year, which is unbelievable. So played 8 years, went to the Grey Cup 7 times, won 5. It was amazing for sort of an unknown football player from Queens. I think from the youth sports, as you know, I coached for 6 years, and the team hadn't had a winning record in 10 years. We got our act together sort of in year 3, went to the Yates 3 times, won it my final year. So that was a great accomplishment, but obviously the coaching staff and the players in the university were very helpful. So that's one thing. And then from a business standpoint, I'm sort of known as a turnaround person. So they used to move me around the world trying to turn around businesses that were performing well. So it was always nice to go in and work with the people and make the significant changes necessary and turning the businesses around.
Well, speaking of turning things around, you've done a lot with your alma mater. Why is it so important for you to give back to the community and especially back to the university?
Well, I'm a man of faith, and I think we're blessed to be a blessing. And Jesus said, to whom much has been given, much will be required. And I have been truly blessed. Kim and I, it's to be honest, if you asked me when I was 16 whether I'd be in this position, I would never have imagined it. So we feel like we have to give back. That is sort of our life's purpose. And we set up our first foundation around 3 A's, academics, athletics, and animal welfare. And those were the things that we loved in our life and probably had the most effect on us. So we've tended to give into those areas and to schools that we've gone to, such as Queen's and University of Guelph, and then Upper Canada College, which was the high school I attended.
Yeah. So I know for a lot of young university athletes, they're thinking, I'm just trying to make a team. I don't know how I'm going to pay for my education. I'm trying to get enough sleep. I'm trying to get my classes in order. And it's hard for them to even see past that. So when you talk to, and even when you're coaching, when you talk to young people in that position, what's your advice for them?
Well, I say to them that their 4 or 5 years at university are very special. You're never going to have a similar type of period in your life to have a little bit of freedom to do some things. So I always encourage the football players. We talked about the triple victory. We want you to succeed in the class, on the football field, and in the community. So I would really encourage and challenge students to get involved in some way in the community, particularly maybe a charitable organization, that type of thing. It just gives you a perspective that you don't get in the other two areas. And so I'd really encourage them to get involved in the community. And then secondly, from an athletic standpoint, is to out-train and out-prepare your opponent. It's really important that you use your time wisely and try to prepare yourself and train yourself to be better than the opponent.
You're an inspiring guy. Well done.